Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. I worked the night shift at a 24-hour gas station just off the highway. A real nowhere kind of place. Just a flickering neon sign, rows of expired snacks, and a register that sticks when you slam it shut. Most nights, it's just me, the hum of the refrigerators, and the occasional trucker filling up before vanishing into the dark. I like the quiet, until the night I realized I wasn't alone. We had security cameras all over the store. 8 little black and white screens stacked in a grid above the register, showing the empty aisles, the parking lot, the highway stretching into nothing. I used to flip through them just to pass the time. That's how I saw him. A man, standing at the edge of the parking lot, just inside the glow of the streetlight, not moving. At first, I figured he was some drifter. We got a lot of them. People looking for a warm spot to stand for a while before heading back to wherever the hell they came from. But something about him felt off. His stance was too stiff. His hands, buried in the front pocket of his hoodie, never shifted. He didn't even glance around, just faced the store, watching. I checked the clock. 12:37 a.m. I did my best to ignore him. Watched the minutes crawl by. 12:50. He was still there. 1:15. Not a single step closer. 1:45. Still there. My skin started to crawl. I picked up the store phone and dialed my manager's number. When he answered, I told him about the guy. As long as he's not causing trouble, don't worry about it, he said, already half asleep. Probably some meth head too paranoid to come inside. I hung up and looked at the monitors again. The man hadn't moved. That's when the power flickered. The lights blinked off for a second. Just a second. But when they came back, the monitors glitched. The feed scrambled into static, then cut to black. And when the picture came back, the man was gone. I exhaled, let out a nervous chuckle. Maybe he wandered off. Maybe I was just being paranoid. I turned back to the register and heard it. Knock, knock, knock. It came from the employee-only door. A slow, deliberate knocking. My stomach tightened. I turned toward the door. It led to the back storage room, a windowless space lined with shelves of cleaning supplies and extra stock. There was no way inside except through the front or the locked emergency exit. And yet, someone was knocking. Knock, knock, knock. I swallowed and glanced at the monitors again. The cameras showed nothing. No one in the back. No one near the entrance. I reached under the counter and pulled out the metal baseball that we'd kept there for security. My palms were sweating. I stepped toward the door. The air felt thick, like the room had been filled with something invisible, something heavy. Knock, knock, knock. I raised the bat, my pulse slamming against my ribs, and swung the door open. Nothing. The storage room was empty. The shelves sat untouched. No sign that anyone had ever been there. And yet, the air was cold, freezing. My breath misted in front of me. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Spun back toward the counter, heart hammering. And then, I saw the monitor. Saw him, standing inside the store. Right behind the counter. Right behind me. A choking, ice-hot terror filled my throat. I spun around. Nothing. The space behind the counter was empty. But the cameras, The camera showed him standing there, his hoodie-covered head tilted toward me, his hands still stuffed in the front pocket. Watching, I bolted, didn't even think, just ran for the exit, my boots skidding on the tile, slammed through the glass doors and stumbled into the night air, gasping. I turned back. The store was empty. No one inside. No shadow behind the counter. The place looked as normal as ever. But on the monitors, on the grainy black and white screens inside, I knew he was still there, standing, watching, waiting. I quit the next day. Told my manager I wasn't coming back. Didn't care if he believed me or not. Before I left, I asked him to check the security footage, just to prove I wasn't losing my mind. He did. He watched the whole tape. When he finished, he looked up at me with a frown. "There's nothing here," he said. "No guy, no knocking, nothing. But I know what I saw. I know he was there. And sometimes when I drive past that gas station late at night, I swear I still see him, standing under the streetlight, watching, waiting for someone else to notice him." Story 2. I worked the night shift at a small town hospital, and to be honest, it's not much different from any other job. The hours are long, the shifts are quiet, and it doesn't take long before you stop being afraid of the dark corners of the hallways and the odd sounds that echo through the empty rooms. But that night, the night I'll never forget, something changed. I saw something that I still can't explain, and it's been 6 months, and it's still haunting me. Around 2 a.m., the halls were eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you start listening for sounds you usually wouldn't. The type of silence that almost feels like it's pressing in on you. I've been on my feet for hours, checking in on patients, doing my rounds. Most of the rooms on the 3rd floor were asleep or sedated, the lights dim, casting long, stretched shadows across the sterile walls. I don't know what made me stop in front of room 308, but I did. The door was cracked open just a little, the soft glow from the hallway lights spilling in and illuminating the emptiness inside. At first, I thought nothing of it. I'd seen strange things in my time. People wandering the halls, patients talking to invisible figures, the occasional scream from the isolation rooms. But I'd never felt the way I did that night. Something wasn't right. I felt it like a cold breath on the back of my neck. I glanced into the room. There, sitting on the edge of the bed, was a woman. Her back was to me, and her hair hung long and black, falling over her face. The hospital gown she wore was so white it almost glowed in the dim light. For a split second, I thought she might be a new patient. Maybe one of the others had gone unnoticed, but then I remembered that room 308 was supposed to be empty. I checked my chart again, even though I knew the name of the patient in that room by heart. There was no one listed. I stood there for a moment, just staring at her. My breath seemed to catch in my chest. I wasn't sure why, but something about her stillness didn't sit right with me. My gut told me to move, to keep walking, but I ignored it. I was the only one on the floor. There was no one else. I cleared my throat, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I asked, my voice a little too loud in the silence. The woman didn't answer. She just sat there, motionless, the dark hair still hanging over her face. I waited, my feet frozen to the spot. She wasn't moving, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching me. I stepped closer, The air in the room was frigid, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in the last few seconds. My hands began to tremble, my fingers cold as ice as I reached out for my radio. I had to call security, I told myself. Maybe she'd wandered away from the ward. I started to raise the radio to my lips, but before I could press the button, she moved. Her head snapped up so fast it made a sickening crack. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath leaving me in a rush. I could see her face now, fully, and I wish I hadn't. Her eyes were wide like they were stretched out of their sockets. Black, empty pits that seemed to suck the life from the room. And her mouth stretched too far, like it was trying to scream, but no sound came out. It was just the wide, gaping void of her mouth, opening and closing like she was trying to say something, but nothing came. I couldn't breathe. My legs wouldn't move. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the radio. The lights overhead flickered, buzzing in the dark, and my heart nearly leapt out of my chest when the radio crackled with static, as if someone was trying to say something on the other end. But it wasn't the radio that caught my attention. No, it was her. In a blink, she was gone, vanished, as if she had never been there. I staggered backward, my pulse racing, my vision narrowing, but there was nothing, no sound. The room was empty again, just like it had been when I first looked inside. I looked at the doorway, but the woman was nowhere to be found. I ran, my feet pounding down the hallway, my body shaking uncontrollably. I don't remember how I got to the nurse's station, but I was there in seconds, out of breath, almost hysterical. "What's wrong?" my coworker, Sarah, asked, her face a mixture of concern and confusion. She must have seen the look on my face, the panic in my eyes, because she stopped what she was doing and took a step closer. I saw her, I stammered, trying to catch my breath, still reeling from the image of the woman's twisted face. "You saw her, didn't you?" Sarah whispered, her face turning pale. I nodded, my throat dry. "You saw the one from room 308. She asked again, her voice low, almost fearful. I nodded again, but the fear that hit me wasn't just from the sight of her. It was what Sarah said next that made my blood run cold. "Room 308, she murmured, looking over her shoulder as if someone might be listening. "That's where the woman took her own life 6 years ago. They say her ghost still haunts this place." I looked at Sarah, trying to wrap my mind around what she'd said. It didn't make sense. I had never heard this story before. I had worked there for years and no one had ever mentioned it. Why didn't anyone warn me? The nurse who was on the night shift the night she died, she saw the same thing, Sarah continued. The woman who died, she was in here, sitting on the edge of the bed, just like you saw her. But no one knows how she died. There was no sign of struggle, no reason for it. I didn't want to hear more. I didn't want to know. I just wanted to forget, to go home, to forget the horrible sight of that woman's face, her eyes staring into mine, her mouth screaming silently. But I couldn't. I knew, deep down, I would never be able to forget. The woman from room 308, the one who shouldn't have been there, was still out there, somewhere in the dark, waiting for the next person to come face to face with her. And I wasn't sure if I ever would again, but I knew I would never, ever feel safe walking those halls at night, and I don't think anyone ever will. Story 3. I've been working security at a corporate office building for just over 3 years. Nothing fancy. A paycheck, a few hours of peace, and the quiet comfort that comes from knowing you're the last person in the building when the lights dim. My shift always started late, sometimes 11 p.m., sometimes midnight. But every night, my job remained the same. Monitor the cameras, walk the halls, and make sure no one's lingering around after hours. The place was empty. It was the kind of quiet that felt like you were in another world. And I liked it that way. No distractions, no calls, just me and the building. But everything changed one night around 3 a.m. I was seated at the security desk, flipping through the screens of the surveillance cameras. The flicker of fluorescent lights overhead hummed as I checked each floor. First the lobby, then the main offices, and finally the back hallways. It was all standard stuff, as usual. No motion, no sign of life. The building was silent, save for the occasional creak of the aging structure. It was the kind of stillness that made the walls feel alive, but I'd gotten used to it. And then the phone rang. It was the old, dusty landline on my desk, the one that only gets used if something's off. It was strange because the line wasn't supposed to be in use after hours. No one called the security desk during the night shift. Not unless they were, well, supposed to. My hand hesitated over the receiver. I glanced at the phone's display. It was an internal extension, a call from inside the building. I picked up the phone, my fingers cold against the plastic. "Security," I said, my voice echoing in the empty room. The line went silent. I waited, the soft buzz of the line filling the quiet. I figured it was just a wrong number or a glitch, something that would resolve itself. And then, through the silence, a voice came, a whisper, so faint at first that I almost thought I imagined it. "Help me." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I hadn't expected it, but there it was again, clearer this time. "Help me." It was a voice, strained and broken, and yet somehow distant, as if the speaker were standing miles away. I froze, my fingers clenched around the receiver, my breath catching in my throat. Who the hell was calling me from inside the building at this hour? I checked the caller ID on the screen in front of me, but there was no name, just a number. The number came from the 7th floor. I sat there for a moment, processing. The 7th floor was empty. No one worked there anymore. The offices had been abandoned for months. Just old cubicles, dusty carpets, and broken windows. A forgotten part of the building. It was completely lifeless. No one was supposed to be up there. Not at this time. Not ever. My heart began to thud against my chest, but I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my flashlight and headed to the elevator. I was supposed to check things out. I wasn't about to sit at my desk, afraid of something I couldn't see. No, I was security, and I was damn good at my job. The elevator doors slid open with a groan. I pressed the button for the 7th floor and waited as the lights flickered overhead. It was as if the building knew I was heading towards something that didn't belong. When the elevator reached the 7th floor, the doors opened with a soft, metallic whine. Darkness. It was absolute. The overhead lights hadn't been working in months, and there was no natural light. Just the dim glow of the flashlight in my hand. I stepped into the cold hall. The silence was unnerving, as if the very air held its breath. The walls were lined with empty cubicles, their plastic chairs tipped over, paper scattered across the floor, as if the space hadn't been touched in years. It felt like I was walking into a graveyard of forgotten employees. I pulled my radio from my belt and called Base. Base, I just got a call from the 7th floor. You sure no one's up here? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a long pause before the voice on the other end crackled back, unsure. No one's in the building but you, the dispatcher replied. You're alone up there. I swallowed, the words sinking in. My gaze swept across the empty hall again. The air felt heavier now, colder. The flashlight beam flickered as I moved down the hallway, my footsteps echoing unnervingly loud in the silence. And then I heard it, a phone ringing. I turned my head quickly. It was coming from one of the cubicles further down the hall. It didn't make sense. There shouldn't have been anyone in the building, and certainly not on this floor. The phones had been disconnected for weeks. I started walking toward the sound, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The phone kept ringing, a sharp, metallic sound that seemed to cut through the stillness like a scream. When I reached the cubicle where the sound was coming from, I saw it. The phone on the desk was ringing. A chill crawled up my spine, but I forced myself to step closer. The phone's caller ID made my stomach drop. It was calling my security desk, my number. I picked up the receiver, my hand shaking. I pressed it to my ear. Who is this? I demanded, my voice barely a whisper. The line crackled for a moment, and then I heard it. A voice. But this time it wasn't a whisper. It was a distorted, warped version of the whisper I'd heard earlier. The voice sounded as though it had been stretched too thin, distorted beyond recognition. You shouldn't be here, the voice said, its tone barely human. It was almost mechanical, a guttural rasp, like something trying to speak through static. The line went dead. I stood frozen in place for what felt like hours, staring at the receiver in my hand. My skin prickled, my pulse racing. I dropped the phone back into its cradle and turned on my heels. I had to get out of there. I ran back down the hall, the darkness closing in around me. My footsteps echoed loudly, unnaturally loud. I reached the elevator and slammed the button. The doors slid shut, but just before they closed completely, I saw it. A shadow standing at the end of the hall. It was tall, thin, and barely visible, but I could feel its presence. It was watching me. I didn't wait. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted toward the elevator, pressing the button over and over again, willing the doors to close. When they finally did, I collapsed against the wall of the elevator, gasping for air. My hands were slick with sweat. The doors closed behind me with a soft ding, and I stared at the blinking numbers as the elevator descended, my heart pounding in my chest. I left the building that night. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to. I wasn't going back. I couldn't. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear that phone ringing, and sometimes, when I'm alone now, I swear I can hear it again. That distorted whisper, the warning, you shouldn't be here.